What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. He has returned. You either love him or you hate him,
Yep.
but it doesn't matter because he's probably right, and you should listen to him. Lyle McDonald, everyone. Lyle, how you doing?
Oh, I'm fine. Just watching the world burn, especially today, given what's going on. So, just like everybody else, waiting to see what's going to happen.
Absolutely. It's a good old time. So, Lyle, we had you back on way back when to talk about nutrition, a concept you're particularly known for. You gave us a little potential update to the rapid fat loss protocol, but we had to get you back on to talk about some training.
Sure.
To paint the picture for our overall discussion today, we have an interesting case study of sorts, which is a former trainee of yours with some unique performance qualities. Can you outline this case for us?
Yeah, and this isn't something I've only seen once, but we generally tend to think that, all right, if your max strength is here, if we strip the weight, you can get, 1,000,000 reps or whatever. And in this specific case, it was on weighted chins specifically, but probably applied to other movements. And the guy, we could just add weight for sets of fives all day, every day. Like he was hanging, the gym off of his waist, and I just keep weight. I would take all that weight off and go to body weight, and he'd get like 8. And I've seen this before, and just to go sort of give some context, right? We frequently, we talk about progression in training, and yes, there are different types of progression. I'm biased towards progressive weight overload over time, not every workout, but over time. And at this point, I don't think anybody would agree with me. We might disagree over timeframes, rates, and that's neither here nor there. But one of the oldest progressions, right, is you set a rep range, 8 to 12, 6 to 10. Don't do 5 to 7 because sets of 7 are just wrong. Like just I don't know why 7s, 9s, 11s, and 13s. Like if I see someone write a rep range of 9 to 11, I know they don't know what they're talking about. It's just anyway, and people are like, oh, just add reps. And then when you hit the top end of the range, stay there a couple of workouts till it gets easier, and then add weight and you drop back down. And that does work in many cases, but number one, people forget. Like if you look at the rep percentage ratio, right, that's standard, whatever. 100 is 1, and 95 is 2, and 90 is 3, and 85 is about. And then but adding a rep is almost the equivalent of adding 2 to 3% to the bar, right? Thereabouts. Like that's kind of like if you ever want to do a conversion, right? If you're ever like, here's my max set of 8, here's my estimated set of 12, add 8 to 12%, 2 to 3% per rep. So adding reps can be just as difficult as adding weight to the bar. People sort of forget this. But I have seen people, and I'm sure you have too, it'll never happen. You can go, cool, we're going to keep the weight the same. I want you to build from 8 to 12 reps, and they'll never do it. They will never, ever, ever get there for whatever reason. But then you can add 5 pounds or add 2% to the bar, and they can stay at 8s till the end of time. And that was kind of, this guy was at the extreme. We happened to be doing 5s or maybe 8s on chins or whatever it was. And higher reps just didn't work, at least not on that movement. Like we would do higher reps on, part of a back workout and shrug backs or rows or whatever. But on that particular movement, adding reps was never going to happen. Whereas adding weight, like I said, all day, every day.
I have seen a couple of similar cases. For myself, I distinctly remember a training block in college where over a 6-week period, I was doing close grip bench presses for sets of 12. And, I'm a little bit of a ways away in my training career. Progress isn't the quickest thing in the world, but I can definitely, add some reps and load over the course of a training block.
Sure.
And over 6 weeks on close grip bench press for 12s, 0 progress was made.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just, and I don't know if it's, with compound movements, we can always get into and I know we'll talk about sort of reasoning, like, what's failing, even so most people know at this point, I train Sumi Singh as a power lifter like her, right? We get to the point in the cycle that we can't add weight for 5s because on dumbbell bench press, for example, just triceps are all, so it's like, cool, we're going to do 3 sets of 3 instead of 2 sets of 5. And eventually we stall out, so it could be a compound thing, but I think for some people, for whatever reasons we'll talk about next. It just is. And when you realize that, it's like, okay, well, this, we're never going to get him from 5 to 8 reps, no matter what. So screw it. We'll just stick him with 5s and add weight every couple of weeks or whatever.
Absolutely. And this brings us to trying to explain this phenomenon. And while I don't think we have a concrete answer to this, and it's probably due to a variety of factors, I think most people, their mind would immediately point towards something going on with fiber types. But when we consider these circumstances, what's your best guess?
Yeah, I think fiber, that was kind of one of my first thoughts, is like, if you're particularly type 2 fiber dominant, we know that those tend to be better for shorter term, strength production, tend to fatigue more. Although, you know what, if you're looking between 5 and 8 reps, unless you're going very slowly, like you're still in anaerobic pathways. I don't know how much that's really going to explain it. We know that with training, the type 2X fibers turn into 2A, even in bodybuilders. Actually, random bit of trivia. Way back in like the 80s, when they were starting to study bodybuilders, they did, so they did a study. They looked at elite powerlifters, elite bodybuilders, and at the time, right, everyone trained high reps, short rest periods, and the muscles of bodybuilders looked more like endurance athletes. And I just find that particularly entertaining for some reason, whereas strength power athletes look like strength power athletes. I'd like to see this data redone, like I think in the modern era. Also, when they were studying elites in the 80s, they were all on drugs. So there's just no telling what we were seeing. So yeah, I could see fiber typing as being part of it. Maybe neurological, as sort of a random, sort of related. I think everybody's probably noticed that some exercises, right, if you're taking them to failure or close to failure, right, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like it starts to slow down. But then there are certain exercises that it's 4, 5, 6, done, right? Shoulders, overhead press, for some reason, you'll 8 and it looks fine. You're like, this is going to be an easy set. And then 9, you're done. I don't know why, other than, again, it is. It could be neurological. Some people have posited body weight is different than, moving your body weight in space. You're probably too young to remember the old Leah Costa manuals and the eight levels of defining exercises, which is better, smarter than you would think. And so is it neurological? Is it fiber typing? Is it because, in a compound movement that the smaller muscle groups suddenly fail or are more limiting than in an isolation? I mean, it's hard to tell, right? There isn't really an isolation body weight back exercise. I mean, there is, but most people can't do planks, at least not concentric, eccentric planks. So yeah, I don't really know. I mean, and this guy had freak biceps, right? Like his upper body was just gigantic. So I don't think it was the case that his biceps were necessarily limiting. It was just like, 5s, tons of weight, body weight. He'd crap out at 8 reps and could never add a rep, right? No matter what we did or even tried, until I finally just was like, screw it, I don't care. I mean, whatever. Like I said, my bias is to adding weight over time. So we'll get the volume, we'll get the reps on other exercises and forget it. It's way more manly. It's a thread in my group about this. So I was like, weighted vest. And so I was like, yeah, but there's something just cool hanging weights off of a dip belt. I'm like, yeah, as a guy, there's just something about having 45 pounds hanging between your waist. It's just, I'll leave that there. But yeah, until the chain catches you, and then it's suddenly a lot less cool. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know, other than for certain movements, for certain people, it just is.
And that brings us into the meat and potatoes of our discussion. And the reason for that being is that whether it's bodybuilding, whether it's powerlifting, basically any sport, you'll just commonly hear this notion. Perhaps to some people, this is just a logical step to take. If you're bad at something, that means you should be focusing on it. That means you should be training it, doing more of it. So when we see these athletes who perhaps, like our case study, he's he doesn't perform well in a higher rep range, or maybe if we consider a similar scenario where there's a person who has a significant drop off in reps from set to set,
Right.
maybe their first set it's 12, next is 8, and then after
Yeah.
that it's 5. We're looking at kind of similar cases here for these individuals, considering this potential weak link in the chain or primary weakness in their performance. Should they be going out of their way to construct dedicated blocks of training to perhaps improve upon these qualities?
Well, I mean, I guess the question then becomes, for bodybuilding or especially for powerlifting or really any performance sport, does it really matter? Okay, now, well, there's actually a couple different issues here. The case study we talked about, like what you're talking about with people that drop a lot of reps, set to set to set, which some people do and some people don't. And I believe Charles Poliquin said that meant you were magnesium deficient or something roughly hilarious along those lines. And we won't go down all kinds of, yeah, anyway. So I think if you've got somebody who's just good in a rep range, from a bodybuilding perspective, I don't know that it matters, right? I mean, we know that we can get growth in a fairly broad repetition range now, from whatever 5s to 6s up to, even higher than that. For a bodybuilder, I don't know that I'd care. If he's doing multiple sets of 5 and we can add weight and that's getting him, lats that he could be a flying squirrel with, then I don't really care. Like I think, like I said, and he did, and maybe this indicates that it's a body weight thing. Like on other back movements, he didn't seem to have this problem. And admittedly, I mean, body weight movements are weird, especially like they are very much impacted by different, even slight changes in body weight because you are moving yourself through space. And, so he'd do that for heavy 5s or whatever it was. And then we'd go do, shrug downs or pullovers as a lat isolation movement and either rows or shrug backs or whatever. And I get the reps there. But I mean, fundamentally, if you could do enough sets of 5, it takes longer. So for bodybuilder that I would care that much. And we might even argue the other case, which is like, okay, if he is just wired this way, whether it's fiber typing or neurological or whatever, why fool with it? Because at the end of the day, bodybuilding is not a performance sport, right? Nobody gives a crap what you do for 12s or 8s or 20s or whatever. I mean, yes, you have to look cool on Instagram. I get it. I understand where the real performance issue or maybe the performative issue comes in. But, by and large, if they're getting bigger, I don't really care. I will, but by the same token, not everyone is built to handle heavy 5s psychologically, biomechanically. I had a training partner once and he was a bit of a freak. He found that behind the neck pull downs felt better than in front. He found that completely stiff-legged deadlifts felt better than slight knee bend RDL. And anyone else that tried to do that, it just hurt. He had super thick wrists. He could handle all kinds of heavy loading. And he did some pretty freaky. Whereas I, who was probably a better endurance athlete than I ever was a strength power athlete, like I think I've always been of the opinion that I was probably a little more wired towards endurance stuff. I was good at reps. I mean, I liked pushing heavy 5s, but I also had good biomechanics. At least for lower body, I could do reps and make progress there, and used to do all kinds of miserable shit in my training back when I trained. When I was young, I trained harder than I do now. I did once a 6-month cycle of the original 20 rep squat, which is warm-ups to 2 grinder sets of 5, all out sets 5, strip the bar, then do a 20 rep Widowmaker. That's how a man does a 20 rep squat. And I did this for months. And one day I went to the gym and I'd started getting anxiety attacks walking to the gym because I knew every set was maximum. And I did my sets of 5, and I stripped the bar, and I looked at it, and I was done. And that was it. I've never done them since. I wore myself out like that, but I could do it. And I could add 5 pounds in a 20 rep range all day, every day. He was both my training partner and this guy that I had trained, humongous, like just responded. He was definitely a hyper responder. So maybe fiber type and, more type 2 fibers, maybe some of the other factors. So from a bodybuilding standpoint, I don't know that the rep range matters so much in terms of like, if you're good at 5s, let's train you on 12s and just beat our head against the wall for something that may very well you'll just never be good at, no matter how much effort we put into it. Now, I do think that's a little bit different. Well, in powerlifting too, like, who cares? If you're good at building your good morning for 5s and that builds your squat, unless it gets unsafe, I don't really give a damn, right? Like if doing 12s is going to hold you back, which it probably will, then screw it. I'm going to, again, that with Sumi, she hates reps. Like, she's just like, can we just do 3s? Like, what, 5 is just too many? She's like, yeah, kind of. I'm like, fine, we'll just do triples on good mornings. And RDL's like, I wouldn't do that with most people because most don't have 30 years of technical training or me watching it. If you're good at, look at Olympic lifters. They've only got to be good at 1. And they do triples and 5s for good mornings and assistance work. And they don't. So I don't know. Now, when you're looking at sports performance, other sports like strength, power are so like a shot putter. What do you got to do? You can throw a shot 1 time, right? It is a very small number of biomotor capacities. Right now, if I've got a distance runner, if I've got a cyclist and he's great at endurance, but his top end sucks, but he's got no top sprint and he can't climb, absolutely I'm going to put a training block and he's going to need to work on his weakness because it's a performance aspect. But if a guy's just doing 5s and some 8s for the other stuff, or Sumi does 8s on what I call donkey work, which is just it's everything that's just that we got to get done. It's just the BS hypertrophies, that's just the crap that's got to get done. I just call it donkey work. I'll save it for that. So I think for bodybuilding, powerlifting, Olympic lifting, that bodybuilding is not a performance sport. Powerlifting, Olympic lifting have just that one thing where it doesn't matter so much. If you're looking at a cyclist for whatever, a team sport where you've got something that's important to the performance package and is holding them back, yeah, absolutely. But I do think, like I said, bodybuilding is probably the most unique activity. We could probably have a 2-hour debate on whether or not it's a sport. Yeah. It's a fun argument. In that there is no explicit performance component. It is the only activity I'm aware of that the competition has literally nothing to do with the train. Fine. Now everyone goes, but you got to practice your posing. Oh, please. You know what I mean. 90% of training for bodybuilding contests has nothing to do with what you do on stage. And I can't think of another activity, another sporting that is like that. So it is such a weird thing that, yeah, it's basically whatever gets you bigger is fine. And if something is not effective for you to get bigger, and to me that would mean you can't progress it, whether it's sets or reps or weights, right? It doesn't, whichever model of progression you like, doesn't really matter. For you, you were like, yeah, you did sets of 12 in the close grip and you were never able to make improvement on it. Well, the improvement is all that, the progress is all that matters in bodybuilding. If doing 8s let you add more weight over the next 6 months, that'll get you bigger. Now, I guess we could get into like fiber type stuff if you want to kind of go down that well, but in the most general concept, I don't know that I would bother as long as what I was doing was allowing progress safely. Obviously, that's a big key of it, right? If somebody's good at 5s and 5s keeps getting them hurt, then I'm going to have to find another option. But by and large, yeah, just wouldn't bother. High reps suck anyway.
Couldn't agree more. But in context there, Lyle, that I think if we do stick to the conversation about bodybuilding, it does become interesting because muscle hypertrophy is such a forgiving and adaptation, and the training is just nebulous to a degree, right? Like it can be whatever. Yeah. It can be whatever to a certain extent. And perhaps in this discussion, it might take some experimenting, right? So we utilize these different rep ranges and we have these training blocks and we see, oh, well, that was unsuccessful, or maybe this block was more successful. And perhaps that's just because you're better or worse in a certain rep range, and that's a genetic limit of yours. But from your experience and the people you've worked with, have you stumbled across people who perhaps they had just an overall poor fitness base, or maybe their muscular endurance was lacking and it wasn't particularly due to any genetic reasons, and then you saw that from utilizing some sort of block more similar to increasing work capacity, that had a benefit for hypertrophy?
Yeah. Actually, I skipped the second half of that first question because that was the other thing. What if you've got someone who generally low work capacity, meaning that they just can't get through a full workout without gassing out, or the person that drops a lot of reps? Now, that could be a bunch of different things. It could be a lack of fitness. I have seen, without getting into the whole failure, people, if you go really close to failure early on, you tend to see faster drop-offs. Some people can do it, although then you get into how long is the rest interval. I think most people would probably disagree with me, but I would say they're wrong. Higher rep, closer to failure, will cause you to drop reps faster than lower reps. You're generating, like we tend to think of heavy fives are more intense. I guarantee you a maximum set of 15 in a leg press will be way more pain. Like a set of 5 in the leg press or the squat is hard, but it's a different kind of hard because you're done before you get a lot of acidosis, before you get a lot of burning, right? When you do that first really high rep set and fill your muscles with acid, and then you try to do it again too soon, you're going to come back and you're going to fatigue much, much, much more quickly. Closer to fail you are. Again, my training partner, who's a little bit of a freak, when I first moved to Austin, when he failed like that, right? Some people can grind, like when he hit it, it was instantaneous. It's like his nervous system would just shut down. It was the weirdest thing. But every once in a while, we'd see with him, if he hit a true failure set, he'd be done for the workout, not just for the exercise. Like, I've only seen it in him, very specific. I've never seen anyone train harder than that human being. The depths of intensity he could go to were inhuman. But yeah, so there's that aspect of it. When I was doing my 2 grinder sets of 5, I would take a 5-minute rest, right? I sat around and did nothing, trying to do it so we've got all of that. But yeah, you do have people that are have a generally low fitness status. I've been lucky a lot, like, okay, Sumi, A, she's been training for 30 years. B, she gets like 20,000 steps a day. So her work capacity is just staggering. Years ago, I trained two female powerlifters. They had been working at FedEx, loading boxes. So 4 hours a night, 5 to 6 days a week, they were moving 50-pound boxes constantly, right? It's not there was no workout I could throw at them that would tire them out. There just wasn't. Their work capacity was inhuman because they'd done all that volume work. So yeah, so I absolutely think that if you got someone that you're either seeing those big rep drops, again, within all that context, or just gassing out at the end of the workout, then absolutely doing, some sort of work capacity training, maybe doing, a block with some shorter rep, more of a conditioning style of workout would actually absolutely have, utility, because now there you are seeing that their limiter is negatively impacting their ability to progress, right? In the other case, and you suck at 8s, cool. If you can progress at 5s, don't care. Here, if you can't get through the full workout with quality training, then that is absolutely limiting your ability to progress. So I think in that case, it would be absolutely different that putting in a block. And the problem is work capacity training is boring and it's not sexy and it's very uninteresting. But in that situation, yeah, absolutely, it has to get done in whatever form you decide, And I think, and so I'm looking at your notes, some points to consider, neurologically inefficient, cardiovascular conditioning, muscular endurance, compromised recovery. I think what people find is that when their work capacity is poor, not only does the workout suffer, but I think they recover more poorly between workouts because they just don't have whatever systems are involved. And we can talk about some of those that are going to facilitate. And that is where, do a volume block at a lower intensity. Just get in some work to improve your general fitness. One of the best piece of it. Do you know who Maffetone is, old aerobic guru. You are all so young. He was an aerobic guru back in the day, and his whole thing was easy aerobic solves everything. All the tri-geeks of the 80s and stuff. And he was like 180 minus age. Don't go above that ever for months and months and months, and then top it off. And in one of his most recent books, he wrote that he knew an American Olympic lifter, who had not made any progress, who did a 2-week aerobic block and suddenly started. So maybe that's what U.S. Olympic lifting needs, is to do more aerobic training, because that's always been really important. I'm totally joking. It's always been what's really important to most European Olympic lifters chain smoke. Right. I read this in his book and I just laughed and laughed and laughed. Talk about proximity bias. But anyway, for bodybuilding, where the lifters are frequently, doing higher repetitions, higher set volumes, relatively shorter rest intervals, depending on your training philosophy, it does become more metabolically taxing. Right now, if you're a power lifter, the average power lifter, and you're sitting around for 10 minutes between reps, not even sets. The big boys do a single and then have to go suck oxygen, sit down for 10 minutes to catch their breath. Again, going back to Sumi, this phenomenal work capacity. Some of it, she's a smaller female, women, different recovery, blah, blah, blah. She trains on an inhuman pace. We're doing like 8 singles at 90%. And she's like, I have to hold her back. Like, will you please rest longer than, I don't know, a minute? Maybe on deadlift, she'll take 90 seconds. Like, what the hell are you doing? But whatever. So I think more so, even for powerlifting, if your conditioning is poor, Westside was very big into GPP and building some general fitness. I think there's a potential benefit of that. But certainly for bodybuilding, where you are higher repetition, I think if that's really a limiter, where by the end of the work, it's possible your workout is just too long, which is often the case, because you're doing too many sets and too many reps. But even if within a moderate volume, you're crapping out before you get through everything, then yeah, absolutely, 4 to 6 week volume block, probably a good idea, or some aerobic work or whatever.
For some of our listeners who the gears might really be turning right now in this discussion, perhaps we could provide some sort of concrete example for them, because, if we consider muscle hypertrophy and the fact that once we equate for the real primary driver of hypertrophy, which is progressive tension overload, that perhaps if they could do a little bit more volume and recover from that could have some positive results. So for someone who might be thinking that they could benefit from one of these work conditioning blocks, how would they identify that their performance in the gym is lacking or the recovery is lacking? Is there maybe like a number of sets in a workout where you would say, okay, if you can't do that number of sets or this rep range without your reps significantly dropping off, or if you can't recover within this many days between workouts, there's probably a good chance that you could use some conditioning work?
That would be difficult for me, to quantify. I don't think I've ever paid enough attention to it. I remember, like, again, some old, my mentor, who's definitely from the low volume camp, and he was like, if you're in the gym for more than an hour, you're probably not training efficiently. Now, I don't agree with the hour thing. That was thrown around for years, and testosterone and hormones, and it's like someone should tell the powerlifters who are they take an hour to warm up, right? For squats. In gear, it takes you an hour to even get to your first work set. But I don't know that if I could, I think, again, Poliquin, for whatever he got to, his early career was a lot better than his late. And he was like 24 to 36 sets per workout is probably the maximum effective range. I think if we look at, okay, let's assume like 8 works, I think 8 challenging work sets per muscle group is pretty sufficient, right? And again, after a year and a half of gnashing and wailing and gnashing of teeth, pretty much everyone's circled back around to go, yeah, what Lyle said all along. And so if you're training, whatever, 3 muscle groups, obviously you're not going to do that full body because that would be absurd. But, if you're training sort of a typical, whether it's an upper lower split, you're looking at, 8 heavy sets per muscle group, 3 or 4 muscle groups probably on average, 24 to 32 sets. You might be doing a little bit less for arms and stuff at the end, but yeah, somewhere in that range. And it's more than just like, okay, you've done your 8 heavy sets for back or for chest, 4 to 6 for shoulders. And by the time you get to triceps, you're just cooked. Like you've got no gas left. Like, yeah, you are being held back by a lack of fitness at this point. And we might also, and this will get into real theoretical stuff for periodization of bodybuilding. Maybe there's some fiber type differences. One thing I've been thinking about for, about a decade, eventually I might write something, I ponder stuff for a while frequently. It's like, we know that there are limiting factors to hypertrophy. Some of these are probably biological, right? We've got all the hyperresponder data. People with more androgen receptors grow better. People who produce more ribosomes. I'm still working on my ribosomeagenesis training protocol. That's going to be my RTP. For whatever reason, people with better mitochondrial function grow better. And I think that's actually really interesting within the context of what we're talking about. Because, could blood flow be an issue? There are, this whole biological system from, we've got myofiber, we've got the muscle fibers, we've got the sarcoplasm, mitochondria, ribosomes, androgen receptor density, blood flow, for nutrient delivery. In the simple, it's the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If maybe deeper beyond the fitness thing, if one of those components is lacking, maybe if we do a targeted block to train that in as much as we can within limits, will that help someone who wasn't growing no matter what else they were, right? If you're always focusing on what you're good at to your early point and you're not addressing what maybe is a weak point, maybe that is a consideration, right? Knowing that mitochondrial function seems to be part of growth and recovery, which makes sense, right? The mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. And that means producing ATP, producing energy to support protein synthesis, maybe better function there, maybe some light aerobic activity to develop mitochondrial function, maybe even high repetition, short rest work to develop that capacity would help improve that. And I then think it's really interesting. Most aerobic activities are lower body. Or would bodybuilders, would they potentially benefit from upper body aerobic training, whether it's an elliptical, an arm bike, a rower? By the arm bike, I mean the Airdyne. This thing is the worst activity you'll ever do in your life. The arm bike, like I get it for people that have lower body disabilities or injuries. It's all they can do. I've done some boring aerobic activity. I could never handle more than about 5 minutes on that thing. But it does make me kind of wonder, would that possibly, if you've got someone who's got a stubborn, that their upper body is growing less well than their lower, do they do some upper body aerobic work? Do they do some, you can do muscular endurance work. We know that a lot of training does, turn on mitochondrial protein synthesis, mixed protein synthesis. Maybe that'll help. If that, maybe build some capillary density. Again, we go back to bro science. Perillo, way back in the day, recommended exactly that. He's like, yeah, you do your heavy work and then you do 2 sets of 20. Garanda, same sort of thing. He would do, things at certain parts of training where you did train on a very short rest interval with higher repetitions and relatively lighter weights, right? Like if you're going to train on 30 seconds, you cannot go anywhere close to maximum. The idea being to sort of stress the muscle metabolically. And maybe that's, going to help sort of get over that block. So I do think in that sort of case, and this all ties together with work capacity, with general fitness. Unfortunately, we can't really determine any of this, except sort of by observation, like, okay, you're doing everything right and it's still not really working. Well, now it may just be that you suck, because a lot of us do. There was a study you probably saw, came out a few months ago. They took twins, which is always an interesting model to use. And they had them do strength training and measure the response, and then they gave them a break. And then they had them do aerobic training and measure the response, and they gave them a break. I forget what it's called. It's like the Struth study or something stupid like that. And what they found was that the guys that adapted to strength training didn't do very well with endurance training, but if they sucked at strength training, and they described it as the opposite training rescued the fitness effect, which basically means that if you're going to respond well to weight training, you're going to respond well. And if not, you need to take up cycling because you're probably going to be a better endurance athlete than you. It sucked, right? Because speed skating and cycling benefit from longer legs. I had biomechanics that were built to squat, and I had a physiology that was built to be an endurance athlete, and it just screwed me. Like I said, I was I got strong enough. But yeah, I think I was and I've got a good buddy. He was a power lifter and he was good, but he was never great. But he was fantastic at rugby. And rugby is one of those sports that you need to be somewhere in the middle, right? You got your elite power athlete, all type 2, certain nervous system, strong, explosive, sucks at volume. You got your endurance athletes, endurance aerobic, psychotic, sucks at strength. And then right in the middle, you got to have a little bit of both. And he was great at rugby because he could build enough endurance and he can build enough strength and power. So I think you've got that component of it too. But if you've got someone who's determined to pursue an activity that they're not a great responder to, targeting some of these potentially untargeted factors probably, I think, could be very beneficial.
I think those points segue nicely into a conversation about periodization. And if we try to target some untapped potential and we consider how forgiving of an adaptation muscle hypertrophy is, right? So you got 5 reps, you got 30 reps, we can make it work. And for that reason, a lot of people have gone with the notion that, well, why don't we use all of the rep ranges all of the time? That seems like a good idea, right? But as you've alluded to, while there are similarities, physiologically, there are some differences, and the energy systems that we're using are contributing in different proportions. And if we just consider at a basic level specific adaptations to impose demands, that brings up the question, if we're trying to improve something, if we're going to use periodization for bodybuilding, should we be using all of the rep ranges all of the time, or should we be taking specialized blocks dedicated to certain rep ranges? Could that have a more positive result?
And I can absolutely go both directions on that, depending on how you want to look at it. One thing the question that does come up that I think should be addressed is that there's this idea of interference between training components. And we know that, for example, heavy strength power training and lots of endurance training, especially running, can often interfere in that they will hamper the adaptations. And what's always been a little interesting is that endurance training hurts the strength training adaptations more than vice versa. And it depends on a lot of variables, how you sequence it. The early studies were like, well, one group lifted weights 4 days a week. The other group did 5 days a week of endurance training. And then the middle group did all of that. Yeah, I'm not surprised that they didn't get good results because you just trained them, because they were like football. It was like football players. You trained them into the ground and you didn't control the volume between the groups. And there's a whole body of literature on that, and it just kind of depends. And people are like, oh, but if I do 5s and 15s, no, because the adaptations, endurance adaptations and strength or hypertrophy adaptations are on absolute opposites of the spectrum. Strength power, 5s and 30s are within the same, to me, they're a continuum within the same set of adaptations. Like, there's the old idea, the old repetition continuum. This is a very, very old idea back in the 80s. And they were like, all right, 5s make you strong, 12s make you big, 25s make you more endurance. And that lived for years and years and years. And make no mistake, but what happened is then that got divided into this like, all right, 5s make you strong, but there's a cutoff. It won't do anything for the rest of it. And 12s make you big, but won't do any. And then 30, but it's like, no, it is not a discrete cutoff. It is a relative proportion, right? A set of 5 may improve 1RM strength proportionally more, but we know that if you do enough sets, you can still grow. It may indirectly improve muscular endurance, And then depending on whether you define relative or absolute, and we'll bother getting into that, not as much of an effect. Sets of 10, the typical, the hypertrophy range or whatever you want to call it. Is it going to maximally improve your 1RM? No, not without some practice. May it indirectly improve it by giving you a bigger muscle to generate more force? Sure. It will probably improve muscular endurance better than the 5s, but not as well as the 30s. And then we know that the 30 to 35 rep stuff, if you go to failure, or at least really close to it, seems to generate about as much hypertrophy. And there's some indication of fiber typing differences, and we can talk, and some data says yes, and some data says no, and there's a good theoretical just based on fundamental physiology, but don't really know yet. Or is a set of 30 going to increase your 1RM? Probably not. Maybe if you practice it a little bit. Can it generate hypertrophy? Absolutely. Is it absolutely going to improve your ability to deal with acidosis and hopefully not puke? Yeah, because when you read the studies and they're honest about it, they're like, yeah, like 4 out of 10 people vomited after the sets of 30 to 35. I'm like, yeah, sounds great, guys. Sounds like a hell of a lot of fun to me. And make no mistake, I've done that stuff. When I was speed skating, you do one-legged squats for maximum reps. We're talking you get up to sets of 50 to 60. Eric Heiden is reported to have, but I know someone, my coach, an athlete of my coach's saw him do it. His coach gave him 200 pounds by 150 half squat for 2 sets. He just did 200 pounds by 300 because he had a date. That's speed skating, right? In my early days of inline skating, I was very by Tudor Bompa, and he had that conversion to endurance phase, which is a lot of, sorry, but 50 reps in the weight room is not 6,000 reps on the bike. But I set up a circuit. It was half squat, incline bench, row, core, what's called a skater squat, where you hold a plate on the back of on your low back and do a squat movement, like shoulder press, pull down, back extension. I started with one set of 50 for each exercise with a minute in between. 2 weeks, I did 2 exercises in a row, 50-50, take a minute, 50-50, minute. At the end of it, I was doing 8 exercises in a row, 50 repetitions. I was a good endurance athlete. I really, and I was a psycho, which you have to be a good endurance athlete. But yeah, so absolutely. But you are definitely training your body to handle acidosis, to not only generate less, increases buffering, lactate transporters, all that stuff, buffering capacity that improves. So I don't think the continuum is discrete. However, no one's going to argue that a set of 5 is going to make you better at buffering acidosis and muscular fatigue and improve muscular endurance any more than a set of 30 is going to generate as much maximal strength. So I think in that sense, absolutely, we can see proportionally differential adaptations. And again, specific adaptations would argue that. Now, back to your original question. Do we do them sequentially? Do we do them all at the same time? Like I said, I can go both ways. If you look back at the original Ultimate Diet or the variation I did, right? I'm sorry, I was in a daily undulating periodization way before it was cool. Monday, Tuesday, sets of 15 to 20 on a minute. Thursday, sets of 6 to 8. Saturday, sets of 3 to 5, right? Not that this was anything new, but it was sort of like, Pollock, when then he came inside and he was like, the sets 2025 train type 1 fibers. This trains type 2A fibers. This trains type 2B fibers. Well, A, humans don't have type 2B fibers. B, all the 2X fibers we do have turned into 2A fibers. So this is a whole lot of bullshit. But the strength and power training may be stimulating, the fibers in a different fashion, right? Because now we've got all this data. We've got increasing amounts of data. I find this so amusing. Go back 30 years, we had muscle growth, and then we had pump growth. Myofibrillar hypertrophy, sarcoplasmic. For about 10 years, I was like, it's bull. And now, all going right back. The Hahn study that Mike Israetel was involved with, I've seen 3 papers now that are like, even one is by Hahn and his Roberts, their lab, and he was like, maybe there's differential types of hypertrophy. And what they actually, when they looked at it in detail, because some of the studies are like, no, training develops both. Those were all in untrained individuals. When you separate it out, then they looked at the trained individuals, there's absolutely a difference in the kind of training that was done in the adaptations. And I think even that's an issue. I will eventually get to the point. I swear to God. You know how I talk. So then we do absolutely get into what's limiting, right? That was the old model, right? Like, let's say, so here's your muscle fiber, or here's your muscle. Got boom, 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 muscle fibers, and everything else is a sarcoplasm. Well, is it possible for the muscle fibers to get to such a point that they have nowhere else to go? That maybe now developing the sarcoplasm and pumping it up gives you more room, right? And again, bodybuilders don't care. Size is size, right? Now, the most recent paper I saw, that we're back to talking about non-functional hypertrophy, and if you're a strength power athlete, being pumped doesn't help you throw better or power, whatever. But for bodybuilding, maybe that's part of it. Maybe we alternate cycles. There was a paper about a year or two ago, some Swedish powerlifters, and they decided to apply blocks of blood flow restriction. You might have read this one.
There was 2-week blocks they would throw in there, and I think it was for front squats specifically.
Yeah, why would you use BFR on the movement that's not? One of the researchers was in my group. He was not happy with my comments about that paper. And what they were trying to do was to develop increased satellite cell proliferation, which is another component of this, blah, blah, blah. And there's even debate over how relevant satellite cells are. But what was interesting about this is that, okay, yeah, they saw muscle growth, but it was only in the type 1 fibers. Now, I think there's two ways to parse that. One is, BFR is an endurance stimulus in a very real sense. Maybe that's why, but other studies haven't shown that, right? Have shown you get growth in both. Because by the time you get to failure on any set, it is a maximal effort, right? Your muscle, only it knows how much force it's having to produce. That's this tedious article series I'm doing on my website right now. What I think happened was this. If you take guys that have trained for powerlifting their whole career, they have trained in such a way to predominantly develop type 2 fibers. I think the type 1 fibers grew because they were proportionally untrained in that set of specific athletes. I think what it did was it sent a stimulus to muscle fiber, because again, if you're doing 5s all day, every day, or even 12s, you're not getting much of a stimulus to type 1 fibers. I think they grew not so much because it was BFR per se, as it was sending a stimulus to both. But if the type 2 are already as big as they're going to get, you're not going to see any growth there. I think, and this is all just trying to sort of paint a picture that depending on your training style, you absolutely, I think, can get somewhat preferential adaptations. And in that sense, from a hypertrophy standpoint, you want everything to be as big as possible, because big is big, right? You can be all show, no go. Nobody cares. They'll ask you how much you bench. Big picture, you don't care. And on stage, well, way back in the day, clean and jerk used to be part of bodybuilding contests. I'm talking in the early, before the IFBB took over, back when the Amateur Athletic Union ran it. It was a physique show, clean and jerk. Bodybuilders had to be athletic. And then Weider took it over, and all that went the way of the dodo. So yeah, so big is big for them. Now, training a powerlifter, do I care about the type 1 fibers? No, because any rep long enough to really rely, they're going to get recruited anyway, but by and large, no rep is going to last that long, right? If I'm training an endurance athlete, yeah, I might want to target those, but trust me, a set of 25 on the leg extension, which my coach used to have us do until I rebelled, is not going to be the same as skating for an hour, where I am getting 60 pushes a minute. 3,600 reps on skates is not 25 reps on the leg extension. Can't be bothered. I dropped that stuff in year 3. So I think all of this kind of comes back to, we can get, so now do we do them all at once? Will we get, I don't think you'll dilute the adaptation in the sense of them interfering. But the question is, will we get the optimal adaptation, right? If we're hitting each one of these once a week, will that give you as strong of an adaptation as really focusing on one?
Hey guys, Mike here. If you're interested in learning more about how to maximize your health, body composition and performance, head over to hammerawayfitness.com, where you can sign up for coaching or even just schedule an hour consult with me to get some of your training and nutrition questions answered. Also, if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did and would like to further support the growth of the Muscle Memoirs podcast, you can give a donation to the link in the show notes, leave us a review, and or share this episode with your friends, whether that be dropping the link in a group chat or putting a screenshot in your Instagram story. I truly appreciate it.